Elias Moran, a weary rancher, was alone at his ranch on a stormy night. Thunder cracked like cannon fire above the black shoulders of the mountains, and the rain drummed against the roof so hard it seemed the sky itself might cave in. Inside the lonely cabin, Abigail Carter gripped a lantern with both hands, her knuckles white, her breath uneven. The glass shook in its frame. She had been alone for weeks since her father's burial, each night longer than the last, every creak of the timbers reminding her there was no one left to answer her fears but herself. Then came the knock, not gentle, not asking. A heavy pounding that shook the door on its hinges. She froze where she stood, the lantern spilling jittering light across the plank floor. The wind howled down the chimney as if it carried a warning. The fist came again, 3 booming strikes that seemed to echo inside her ribs. She set the lantern down and scrambled for her father's rifle resting by the hearth. The stock felt slick in her hands, her palms damp with sweat. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked, weak against the storm. A pause. Then a voice, deep as gravel rolling down a canyon. "Ma'am, open up. I ain't here to harm you." The words did not ease her heart. If anything, they made it pound harder. She had heard enough tales from her father of drifters and raiders who came with soft words before taking all they wanted. The door creaked beneath another push, and Abigail raised the rifle, sighting at the center of the wood. "You take 1 step in and I'll shoot." The voice came lower this time, urgent. "Men are coming, bad men. If you don't let me in, they'll take more than your food." A flash of lightning turned the night white. In that moment, she saw him through the narrow crack of the door. A giant of a man, hair tangled and dripping, wrapped in a soaked bearskin coat that clung to his bulk. His face was carved with scars, one long and pale across his jaw. His eyes caught the light, not cruel, but hollow, tired, like someone who had been hunted far too long. Abigail's finger trembled on the trigger. "Stay back." He didn't move forward, only lowered his head, rainwater streaming down his beard. "I swear it, miss. I come with no harm. But if you keep me out, they'll do worse than you can imagine." The wind slammed a shutter open, and Abigail spun. The lantern flame guttered, throwing shadows wild across the room. Through the window, she saw them. 3 riders at the edge of the trees, torches flaring against the storm, their rifles slung ready. Her throat tightened. She had thought herself safe here in the cabin her father built, but the riders were proof that safety was an illusion. The mountain man's words pressed into her. Men were coming. Bad men. The pounding at the door returned. Not his fist this time, but the sound of hooves, closer, circling. She gripped the rifle harder, torn between 2 fears, the stranger at her door and the strangers outside. Jonas Hale, though she did not yet know his name, raised his voice against the storm. "Choose quick, ma'am. Them riders won't ask polite." "Let me stand with you, or face 'em alone." Abigail's breath hitched. Her father's voice echoed faint in her memory. "Don't trust their smiles. Trust their actions." Lightning cracked again, and in its flash, she saw the riders dismounting, rifles already in hand, faces hidden under broad-brimmed hats. The storm roared louder, as if the heavens themselves knew what was about to fall upon her, and in that moment she understood. The pounding at her door was no longer a question. It was a warning. The shutter blew wide, and in the burst of rain and wind, 3 armed men stepped into the lantern's light, closing in on her father's cabin. The fire popped and hissed, smoke curling up the chimney as Abigail held the rifle steady, the barrel aimed at the broad figure hunched near the flames. The stranger had peeled off his soaked bearskin coat and set it by the hearth, steam rising from the heavy pelt. His shirt clung to him, torn at the shoulder, the scars of old battles carved deep across his skin. He sat without flinching, as though the rifle pointed at his chest was no more than a passing nuisance. "Don't sit yourself down like you belong." "Here," Abigail said, her voice tight, trying to sound harder than she felt. Her father's rifle weighed heavy in her trembling hands. "You say men are coming, but maybe you ride with them." The man's gaze lifted to hers. His eyes were gray, storm-colored, calm in a way that unsettled her. "If I rode with them, girl, your door would already be down." His tone carried no apology, no attempt to soften. He spoke as if only truth fit his mouth. She swallowed. The storm raged outside, wind rattling the shutters and rain hammering the roof, but inside the cabin the firelight made every shadow long and sharp. She didn't know whether to fear the storm or the man before her more. He leaned forward, forearms resting on his knees. "Name's Jonas Hale. Long time back, I rode alongside your father. Cattle war down near the Brazos. He pulled me from a fire when I should have been left for dead. Never forgot it. Swore I'd pay that debt. Tonight's the night it comes due." Abigail's throat tightened. She hadn't heard her father speak of a man named Jonas, but he had kept his past locked tight, especially the war years. All she remembered were his warnings before the fever took him. Men will come. Don't trust their smiles. Trust their actions. "You expect me to believe that?" she whispered. Jonas tilted his head, the firelight catching the scar down his jaw. "Believe what you will. Won't change what's coming." He turned toward the shutter, where the wind howled like a wolf. "They'll circle the place, try and smoke you out. You alone? You won't last till dawn." A new sound rose over the storm, men's voices, low at first, then clearer. Laughter, sharp against the rain. "Open up, girl," one called, mocking sing-song. "We just want to talk." Abigail froze. Her heart thudded so hard she felt it in her throat. Jonas's hands balled into fists, his jaw tightening. "That ain't talk," he muttered. Another voice rang out, harder, meaner. "Ain't no sense hiding. Your daddy owed more than he could pay. Debts pass on. Best let us in polite-like." The rifle felt heavier still in her hands. She looked back at Jonas. He hadn't moved toward her, hadn't tried to take the weapon. He only sat there, shoulders like boulders, eyes fixed on the door as if he'd break the men outside with his stare alone. Her father's words echoed in her head. "Don't trust their smiles, trust their actions." The men outside laughed again. Jonas didn't flinch, didn't smile, just waited. Slowly, Abigail lowered the rifle, though it still shook in her grip. The fire popped, casting sparks into the air, as if the cabin itself braced for what came next. Then a rifle butt slammed against the door, splintering the wood with a crack that shook the frame. The lantern glass trembled, and Abigail gasped, as the cabin shuddered beneath the force of men who weren't asking anymore. The door gave way with a splintering crack, the iron latch snapping as if it were nothing more than twine. The storm howled in with the men, rain whipping across the floorboards and quenching the fire for a heartbeat before the flames roared back. Abigail staggered back, rifle tight against her chest, eyes wide. 3 riders pushed into the cabin, water streaming from their coats, boots striking heavy on the wood. At their head strode a man who carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. Elias Vance. His name was whispered across counties, tied to broken contracts, lost farms, and vanished neighbors. He was not old, not yet. But there was something about him that felt ageless, like a snake coiled too long in the dark. His face was clean-shaven, sharp, handsome to some, but it was his eyes that marked him. Cold, icy, dead eyes that never softened, not even in the warmth of firelight. He swept the cabin with a glance and smirked when he saw Abigail. "Evening, Miss Carter. Long time since I stood in this cabin. Shame your father ain't here to greet me proper." Abigail's jaw tightened. "You've no right here." Elias chuckled, stepping closer. He pulled a packet of folded papers from inside his coat, shaking the rain off before holding them high. "Your father owed me, girl. Money, cattle, land, more than he could ever pay. These papers say clear as gospel Carter signed this land over. And debts, they don't vanish in the grave. They pass on. Her stomach twisted, but she kept her voice steady. My father never signed away this land. He built it with his hands. He'd have burned it before he gave it to the likes of you. The smirk on Elias's face widened, though it didn't touch his eyes. You think you knew him? Fathers keep secrets from daughters. You'll learn that now. He laid the papers on the table as though planting a flag, then turned his gaze toward the fire, unconcerned with the storm outside or the trembling girl before him. From the shadows, Jonas Hale rose to his full height, stepping forward. Firelight danced across the scar on his jaw, throwing his face into half-darkness. She ain't alone, Vance. The room stilled. The two riders flanking Elias shifted, their hands brushing the butts of their pistols, eyes darting to the mountain of a man now standing between Abigail and their boss. Jonas didn't draw, didn't posture. He just stood there, broad as the cabin beams, calm as stone. Elias cocked his head, studying him. Jonas Hale! Thought you were rotting in some canyon grave? Jonas's voice was gravel. Not tonight. For the first time, Elias's grin faltered. He looked from Jonas back to Abigail, then waved a hand as though brushing away his own unease. Doesn't matter. Big or not, one man won't change the truth. That paper says what it says. You've till sunrise, girl. Sign it, or the storm outside won't be what you fear. It'll be me. Abigail felt her knees weaken, but forced herself to speak. I'll never sign. Elias stepped closer, so close she could smell the rain and whiskey on his coat. Then you'll wish the storm had taken you before I did. His words were soft, but venom dripped from every syllable. He turned back to the table, plucked the papers up again, and held them over the fire. Abigail's heart lurched. Proof or lie, they were all she had to fight with. She moved as if to stop him, but Jonas caught her arm, holding her back with a firm grip. Elias's smile returned, cruel and satisfied. Land or no land, girl, it don't matter what's written. What matters is who can burn the words. He released the papers into the flames. For a moment, the fire dimmed under the wet ink, then flared, curling the pages into black ash. Elias stood over the smoldering proof, his cold eyes fixed on Abigail. Till sunrise, he said again, his voice carrying the weight of promise and threat alike. The cabin smelled of smoke and ink, the last hope of her father's word turning to ash at her feet. Wind bullied the cabin long after Elias and his men stepped back into the rain, leaving the smell of scorched ink. Abigail stared at the black curls of paper in the grate until the embers cracked them to dust. Her chest hurt with the short breaths she drew. Jonas eased the door back into place and dropped the splintered latch on the table like a broken promise. He burned lies, he said, voice low. Not law. Your father wasn't a fool. She turned on him, eyes rimmed red. You knew him? Enough to know he hid things worth keeping. Jonas scanned the mantel, the warped books on the shelf. Your pa told me once he trusted paper only when it slept where thieves wouldn't look. The trunk? She asked. Too easy. He crouched, running a palm across the floorboards, listening for a rattle. He mentioned a knothole near the hearth like an eye watching fire. Abigail dropped to her knees beside him. They tapped the boards. One answered hollow. Jonas slid his knife into the seam and pried. The board lifted. Cold air breathed up from the dark. Inside lay a bundle tied with twine gone brittle. Abigail's hands shook as she drew it out and set it on her lap. She pulled the cloth open. A small leather ledger appeared, its edges darkened with years of oil and use, and an oilskin envelope sealed with a crumb of red wax. Her name, written in her father's heavy hand, cut across the flap. Abigail broke the seal with her thumbnail. Inside lay a deed folded in thirds, thick paper carrying a notary's stamp. She held it close to the fire. The county seal glimmered, her father's signature bold and steady. The words were plain. Land free and clear, no lien, witnessed and recorded. Her lips parted. Heat pricked her eyes. He did it, she whispered. He cleared it. Jonas nodded once, grave as judgment. I figured as much. Vance deals in fear, not facts. He tapped the notary stamp with a scarred knuckle. This'll wake the sheriff. Maybe even the town, hope flared sharp. Abigail cradled the deed and ledger against her chest, as if she could press her father's heartbeat back into them. If this is the truth, why am I still shaking? Because paper won't stop men who kill for land. Jonas reseated the floorboard and straightened. Truth needs a back and a voice. She lifted her eyes to his. Then why stay? You could have left when the door broke. He looked at his scarred hands as though reading old scripture. Because your father once did the same for me. For a moment they breathed together in the firelight, storm noise rolling like drums beyond the walls. Abigail tucked the deed into the oilskin, slid the ledger beneath her coat, and reached for her father's rifle. Then we make them here, she said. Jonas drew a long breath. And we make them answer. Outside, orange light bled along the shutter's edge. A torch hissed in the rain. Another flared behind it. Horses stamped. Men murmured. The riders had never gone. They had the ranch ringed in fire. Gunfire cracked through the storm, a sound sharper than the thunder above. The first bullet smashed a window pane, spraying glass across the floorboards. Abigail screamed and dropped behind the hearth, clutching her father's rifle. Jonas shoved the heavy oak table against the front door, muscles straining, jaw clenched. Another shot tore through the wall, splinters raining over his shoulder. The cabin shuddered like it was made of paper instead of logs. They've started, Jonas growled, pressing his back against the door. Stay low. Abigail's hands shook as she tried to load. The cartridges slipped, clinking onto the floor. She snatched one, shoved it in, snapped the chamber shut. Her heart hammered so loud she thought they must hear it outside. A voice carried over the storm, mocking. You can't hide in there forever, girl. Come out, make it easy. Laughter followed, cruel and certain. Jonas crouched beside her, one hand on her wrist, steadying the rifle's barrel. His voice was calm, though his eyes burned. Don't waste shots. Breathe. Count 'em before they count you. She nodded, lips trembling, and pulled herself up to the window. A rider crouched near the corral fence, muzzle flash lighting his face. Abigail fired. The recoil punched her shoulder, and the rider fell back with a grunt, his hat spinning into the mud. Her breath caught. She had hit him. She had truly hit him. But there was no time for shock. More bullets screamed through the dark, thudding into the logs. Jonas lifted a stool and hurled it aside, then flipped the water barrel against the wall as cover. Another shot ricocheted, whining off iron. He snatched up the spent cartridge she had dropped, pocketing it for later. Nothing wasted. Not tonight. Between shots, Abigail whispered, almost choking on her words. I can't hold. I'll break. Jonas took her hands around the rifle, his scarred knuckles wrapping hers. His voice came low, fierce. Not while I'm here. You'll hold. We both will, the storm raged. Hooves thundered as riders circled. A torch arced through the shattered window, trailing sparks. It struck the drapes, flames racing up the cloth. Smoke rolled into the cabin, stinging Abigail's eyes. She coughed, dragging a bucket of water, but Jonas was faster. He tore the burning fabric down with his bare hands, seared fingers curling around the wood shaft. With a roar like some cornered bear, he hurled the torch back through the window. A cry split the night. A rider went down, flames licking across his coat as he rolled in the mud. The others shouted, spooked by the blaze. For a moment, the gunfire stalled, replaced by the storm's roar and the smell of singed cloth and smoke. Abigail pressed her back to the wall, chest heaving, lungs clawing for breath. Her ears rang, but beneath the ringing she heard something worse. Measured footsteps. Through the smoke-hazed glass, she saw him. Elias Vance. He stood tall among the storm, coat collar turned up, hat pulled low. His face glowed orange in the firelight as he bent to strike another torch. He lit it slow, deliberate, never taking his eyes off the cabin. Jonas followed her gaze, his jaw hardening. Abigail's fingers tightened on the rifle, though her whole body shook. Outside, Elias lifted the torch high, the flames hissing as the rain struck them, and began walking toward the cabin. Not in a rush, not afraid, step by steady step, like a man certain the night belonged to him. Smoke clawed at her throat, filling her lungs until each breath came ragged and hot. Abigail stumbled against the wall, coughing hard, her eyes burning from the haze that poured off the charred curtains and smoldering timber. The cabin was choking with fire and gunpowder, its walls trembling with the hammer of fists and the crack of bullets outside. She pressed her sleeve over her mouth, but it gave no relief. Every cough sounded like a plea. "Jonas," she wheezed, clutching the rifle to her chest. "Take the deed. Take it and run." Jonas was already dragging another bucket across the floor, sloshing what little water remained onto the flames. His voice was steady but low, rough as gravel. "No. You have to." She coughed again, tears streaking down her smoke-stained face. "You're strong enough. They'll follow me, not you. If you carry it, the land—" He turned on her, eyes blazing through the haze. "Your father's land dies if you die. Don't you see? You're the claim, Abigail. You're the voice. A paper without you is nothing but ash." Her back hit the table as another shot shattered a shutter. The cabin shook with the impact, smoke rolling thicker now. She pressed the rifle tighter, knuckles white, and felt her knees weaken. Her heart pounded so hard she thought her chest might split. "I can't," she whispered. "I'm so small against them." Her voice cracked, breaking open with the truth she had tried to hide since the night her father died. Alone, she was nothing but a frightened girl in a storm. Jonas stepped close, crouched until his scarred face was level with hers, his voice a low thunder. "Small ain't weak. Weak is giving in, and you ain't weak." Her lip trembled. The storm outside roared louder, lightning casting brief silver through the smoke-filled dark. She thought of her father's voice, the rough way he had taught her to hold the rifle, the calloused hand on her shoulder when he said, "Stand tall, even when the ground shakes." Abigail lifted her chin, though tears cut through the soot. Her breath steadied. The rifle grew lighter in her grip, as though her father's hand was guiding hers again. Jonas watched her, gave a single nod. "That's it." Another torch struck the outer wall, flames licking across the wet logs. The heat drove them back toward the rear of the cabin. Jonas kicked the back door once, testing its frame. The hinges rattled but held. He looked at her. "Together," she nodded. "Together." He planted his boot against the door, muscles coiling. Abigail braced herself with the rifle ready, her heart hammering not from fear now, but from resolve. Smoke swirled, sparks floated like ghosts in the air. "Now," Jonas growled. They hit the door with their shoulders, wood cracking under the force. A second shove splintered it wide, and the storm's cold rain rushed in like salvation. They stumbled into the night air, coughing, blinking against the sudden downpour. For a heartbeat, the rain drowned the fire, and the thunder muted the gunfire. Abigail gasped, thinking they had broken free. Then a figure moved in the rain, waiting. Elias Vance. His coat glistened dark, his hat brim dripping steady rivulets. He held a pistol low but ready, its hammer cocked, his pale eyes gleaming in the torchlight. The storm swallowed the world around them, but his voice cut through clear as a knife. "Took you long enough." Rain hammered the yard until the mud churned slick beneath their boots. The storm turned the earth into a battlefield, thunder splitting above as if the heavens themselves bore witness. Jonas crashed into two riders at once, the weight of his frame knocking them down into the muck. Fists struck bone, dull cracks lost under the storm's roar. One man yelped, the sound swallowed by Jonas's growl as he drove him into the ground. The other tried to rise, but Jonas's scarred hands dragged him back down, pounding until his pistol slipped from his grasp and vanished in the sludge. Abigail staggered through the rain, the oilskin packet clutched to her chest. The deed pressed against her ribs like the last beating heart of her father's legacy. She coughed from the smoke still burning her lungs and shouted, her voice straining against the storm. "Sheriff! Sheriff!" The cry broke raw in her throat. There was no answer but the thunder. Elias stood not 20 paces away, pistol in hand, coat dark with water. He did not flinch from the storm. His pale eyes glinted as though he owned the night. He laughed, a low rolling sound that carried even over the rain. "No sheriff's coming for you, girl. No law listens to a Carter word." Abigail's hands shook around the deed. He has to." Elias tilted his head, smirk curling. "Law bends for silver. I've plenty." Jonas broke one man's jaw with a savage blow, the crack sharp as a splitting branch. The second rider struggled, boots scraping mud, but Jonas pinned him with a knee to his chest. Abigail wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She had never seen such violence, not from her father, not from anyone. Jonas was a storm of his own, his scars burning under the lightning, his fists red with mud and blood. Abigail's knees buckled as Elias raised his pistol, calm, patient, certain. She clutched the deed higher, her only shield against him. "This land is ours!" she screamed. Another flash of lightning split the sky, and then hooves. Heavy, steady, cutting through the storm. A horse burst from the tree line, its rider leaning low against the rain. A lantern swung at his saddle, throwing wild arcs of light. The sheriff, gray coat soaked, rifle across his lap. His horse's hooves sent mud flying as he reined in hard, eyes narrowing on the chaos before him. Abigail stumbled forward, desperate, clutching the oilskin. With a sob that was more rage than fear, she hurled the packet into the mud at his boots. "My father's word lives here." The sheriff bent from his saddle, snatched the papers from the muck, and tore the oilskin open. Rain streaked the ink, but the county seal gleamed, stubborn and undeniable even in the storm. He held the deed in one hand, his other steady on the rifle across his knee. His face hardened, jaw tight as stone. Elias spat into the mud, sneer cutting through the storm. Bought men don't turn on their pay. The rain sheeted down, drumming on tin, on hats, on guns. Jonas rose from the mud, breath ragged, blood and rain running together down his arms. Abigail stood at his side, trembling but unbroken, her eyes locked on the sheriff as though he held not just the law, but her father's ghost in his hands. The sheriff lifted his head. His rifle swung up, barrel gleaming with water, his gaze fixed past the edge of shadow. Lightning flashed white across the yard, catching on his steel, and in that blinding instant, no one knew who he meant to shoot. The storm broke into a pale gray dawn, the clouds thinning into streaks of ash across the horizon. The mud of the yard was churned to a dark soup, littered with shattered glass, splintered wood, and the still forms of men who had thought the night theirs. Smoke drifted lazy from the blackened cabin, its roof sagging but still standing. Abigail stood in the yard with her father's rifle clutched to her chest, hair plastered damp across her face, soot streaked on her cheeks. Jonas loomed beside her, blood on his knuckles, coat torn and heavy with rain. Hooves clattered on the road. One wagon, then another. Townsfolk arrived in trickles, drawn by the thunder of gunfire and the glow of torches through the night. Farmers, merchants, a few ranch hands, faces pale in the morning light, whispering as they took in the wreckage. The sheriff sat his horse in the center, rifle still across his lap, the deed clutched in his hand. Elias Vance stood before them all, his hat shadowing eyes gone colder than the dawn. His voice carried sharp and clear. "You're seeing the truth, folks. This girl's a liar and that man's a savage. They spilled blood to steal what ain't theirs." His coat dripped with rain, his pistol rested easy at his hip, and his words dripped venom that seemed to stick to the crowd. Her pa signed this land over. "I've got witnesses. This savage only came here to finish the job." Abigail's breath caught, fear squeezing her chest, but she forced herself forward. She stepped into the muck, her boots sinking, and raised her voice though it cracked against the morning air. "My father built this land honest. With his hands, with his sweat. He cleared it. He died for it. And this," she pointed at the sheriff at the paper in his hand. "This deed proves it's ours," the crowd murmured, shifting. Faces turned, some skeptical, some curious, some hardening with sympathy. Jonas, battered and bruised, stepped forward. He stood tall, his shadow long in the rising light. His voice rolled low, steady, scarred but unshaken. "Judge me by what I've done tonight. I stood by her as her father once stood by me. I didn't come to take, I came to keep a promise." He dropped his weapon into the mud, laying it down where all could see. The gesture carried more weight than his words. Men in the crowd, hardened ranchers, nodded faintly. The sheriff raised the deed, his face unreadable as he let the silence stretch. Then he spoke, his words striking like a hammer on an anvil. "This land belongs to Abigail Carter. By law, by deed, and by the word of her father. That's the truth, and it stands." A ripple moved through the crowd. Some cheered softly, others muttered, but the shift was clear. Justice had turned its face, Elias's lip curled, fury boiling beneath his calm mask. "You fools! You think this slip of paper means a damn when silver buys more than words?" His hand drifted slow toward his pistol, fingers twitching near the grip. The townsfolk closed ranks, stepping closer, eyes locked on him. Men and women who had feared him for years now stood firm. For once, Elias Vance's shadow did not stretch as far as he thought. The sheriff dismounted, boots heavy in the mud, rifle still steady. "Elias Vance, you're under arrest." "Stand down." Elias smiled, but it was a thin, dying smile. His hand still twitching near his pistol, the line between surrender and gunfire drawn thinner than the morning light. Elias's hand twitched once, then settled on the grip of his pistol. The crowd froze, breath held in the damp morning air. A rooster crowed somewhere down the street, shrill and lonely, a sound that seemed to split the silence. The sheriff's rifle was leveled, but Elias didn't care. His eyes were locked on Abigail, cold and unblinking, his lips curling into something between a sneer and a challenge. The sheriff stepped forward, voice rough but certain. "It's done." Abigail let out the breath she'd been holding, her chest heaving, her body shaking from the weight of what she had just done. The rifle slipped slightly in her grip, but she held it, unwilling to let it fall. Elias cursed low, spitting into the mud, blood streaming between his fingers. His eyes burned with a hatred deeper than any wound, but the power had drained from him. The sheriff pressed the muzzle of his rifle to Elias's chest. "You'll stand trial, or you'll hang. Either way, this town's done fearing you." Two ranch hands from the crowd stepped forward, binding Elias's arm, forcing him to his knees. The proud rancher who had once owned men with silver now knelt in the mud like any other outlaw. Abigail swayed where she stood, her legs weak, her heart pounding. She felt Jonas's presence beside her before she saw him. He put no hand on her shoulder, no word of command. Only his eyes met hers, tired but steady, full of a quiet pride. "Your father'd have stood tall tonight," he said softly. "So did you." Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes, but she managed a nod. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to ask him to stay, but her voice broke before the words could rise. The sheriff hauled Elias up, dragging him toward the waiting wagon. The crowd parted, murmuring, the spell of fear broken. Abigail's gaze lingered on Jonas, searching his face for an answer. He looked back at her, unreadable, scarred, shadowed by the weight of things unspoken. And she wondered in the silence, when this day ended, would he remain by her side or vanish again into the mountains that had made him? The days after the storm carried a strange quiet, the kind that felt like a gift. The smoke from the cabin's walls no longer rose, the ash had settled, and the earth had drunk its fill of blood and rain. Grass pushed green again through the mud, and the ranch breathed as though it had been waiting all along for its rightful keeper to claim it. Abigail rose before dawn each morning, as her father once had. Her hands blistered from mending fences, her arms sore from hauling rails and stringing wire, but there was a steadiness in her work. She no longer counted the hours by fear, but by what she built back piece by piece. The neighbors who had once kept their distance now came by, some to lend a tool, some to offer a sack of seed, others just to stand with her a while. She felt their eyes linger on her a little longer, not with pity, but with a quiet respect. The sheriff passed once a week, tipping his hat, his rifle across his saddle. Elias Vance was locked away, his threats now nothing but hollow echoes behind iron bars. The land was hers, free and clear, sealed not only by her father's hand on paper, but by her own courage in fire and storm. In the golden light of late afternoon, when the sun stretched the shadows long across the pasture, she paused at the fence line, sweat on her brow, hands raw, and thought of Jonas. His voice came back to her as if the wind carried it from the ridges. "Small ain't weak. Weak is giving in." She held to those words when the nights grew too still and the silence seemed larger than the sky. They kept her steady. They made her more than she had been. One evening, as the sun bled red behind the mountains, she looked up from the corral and froze. A shadow moved on the ridge. Tall, broad-shouldered, cut against the fire of the sky. Jonas stood there, motionless, watching. Her heart leapt before her breath could. For a moment she thought he might ride down, that the bond forged in smoke and blood might tie him to this land as much as it tied her. But Jonas Hale was a man of the high country, not of walls or fields. He raised a hand to his brow and tipped his hat once, a gesture simple yet heavy with meaning. Then he turned, fading back into the dark line of the pines. She stood long after he vanished, the evening chill running over her arms, the sound of crickets rising. She didn't cry. She didn't beg the wind to bring him back. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked back toward the porch, her boots steady on the packed earth. Fear once ruled me, her voice whispered in the hush of twilight. But a mountain taught me. Strength isn't how loud you roar, it's how gently you hold on. The last light washed over the ranch, the fields glowing gold, the storm long past. Abigail Carter stood on the porch, the horizon wide before her, her father's land secure. The world felt larger now, but she no longer felt small within it. She had endured. She had stood tall, and though the mountain had gone back to its shadows, its strength remained in her.